Hello, everybody. Welcome to Think with Armel episode number. Drumroll. All right. Welcome, family. Thank you for joining, and hopefully you enjoyed this conversation because I very much did. I really did. I actually learned about diabetes. To be completely honest, I used to think I knew what it was, but I really didn't. And this is part of the reason why I decided to do this because there's a lot of noise. When I say noise, there's a lot of misinformation out there or half information. And part of the reason I decided to talk to this gentleman, Mr. Chet Galaska, is because not that he's necessarily an expert in diabetes, he's not a medical professional or anything. He happens to be a diabetic patient that came to realization that how ignorant people like myself and himself were about diabetes. And his only mission is just to educate, to let people know, just to understand the disease better. And just in a nutshell, right, just to kind of bucket this out or box this out for you, there's basically two types of diabetes. And I know everybody knows this type one, type two, but most people don't really understand. And part of the reason for that is because they both have the same consequence. They cause your blood sugar to rise dramatically, right? And that is known as hyperglycemia. Essentially, you have too much blood in your system. And so specifically type 1 is the inability of your body, aka your pancreas, to produce insulin. So the way it works is usually when you eat, you break down your food, you create your the food turns into glucose. And then for that glucose is fuel for your body, your muscles, your brain, everything. So for that glucose to be consumed, insulin that is secreted by your pancreas basically is like a key that allows your cells, basically opens the door to your cells, the glucose goes in, your body consumes the glucose. What happens for type 1 people is they are not able to produce either at all or enough of insulin. Therefore, their blood sugar rises, which is why you see sometimes people sticking themselves with that pen. What that is an insulin pen. So they basically artificially inject themselves insulin to help bring down their blood sugar, like I just described. Now, the difference between type 1 and type 2 is actually insulin resistance. So what happens is that your body is actually producing the insulin, but your cells just don't resist it. So it doesn't work essentially, which is a completely different disease from type 2. But ultimately, the consequence of in both cases is your blood sugar goes all the way up. Therefore, we kind of delved into it, like we broke it down, and this is what I like. Like he wasn't talking as a medical professional; he was talking like more like a regular dude to another regular dude, just trying to figure the thing out for the most part. And it was very, very enlightening. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot, just not just for me. And hopefully you listen to this and you pick up a thing or two that's going to help you understand diabetes better. Because most of the time people just ignore it or they don't pay attention. A lot of people go around with diabetes for years, and by the time you catch up to it, it's more often than not, it's too late, and therefore you are not able to actually get ahead of the disease and deal with it appropriately. It's quite simple. It's true that to deal with the disease, there's some complexities, but if you get ahead of it in time, then you're able to manage it and actually lead a fairly normal life. I've got friends that have this disease. I have family members that have this disease, and I'm gonna be having them listen to this conversation as well because it really, really helps you understand the disease from a layman's perspective and gives you the basic tools you need to approach it, so to speak. So thank you very much for joining. This is gonna be very, very educational. So share this with family, friends, anybody you think that might need this because it's useful information that's gonna help. It might save somebody's life actually. So thank you for joining. Hopefully you learn a thing or two about diabetes and hopefully you help save somebody or at least empower somebody to take the right set of actions that's going to allow them to lead a healthier life as they go on about their life and their day. Thank you very much for joining. This is going to be Think with Armel episode number 5. Please leave me a comment below if you enjoyed the conversation. like, share, and obviously subscribe. That way, every time I post a new video, you'll be the first to find out. Thank you very much. This is Chet Galaska with me, Armel Tekam, on Think with Armel, episode number 5. Enjoy. Thank you very much. Background is actually I'm a mechanical engineer by training, so I have some understanding of material science. And when you said you were basically smelting steel, I guess you were producing different grade steels. Did you have a specific type of steel that you were working with, or was it just
No, we had a number of them. We made anything from carbon steels of a couple of different grades, but our primary product was stainless steels, and we produced 6 or 8 different kinds of those. We got into Hastelloys, which are very high-priced, high nickel
yeah?
products.
Hmm.
So they're all pretty specialized. We did them for industrial applications. If a
Okay.
company was a pump company that needed to pump hydrofluoric acid 500 feet in the air at 300 degrees, they would buy the casting from us to make that product work. So the customer did the engineering. We just provided the product.
Product with the specifications of the material. Yeah.
Now, if you're curious about this, I do have one. I've got a lot of interesting stories, but there was one where a company came in. They were in the petroleum business, and when they when they refine petroleum, there are these big cylinders that they do it in, and they had propellers at the bottom of them that would keep the fluid agitated. So it's a very corrosive atmosphere, and they were putting these cast iron propellers in there. And the company that produced these units decided that they would like to make them last longer because they were having to change them out every few months.
Ah,
So they ordered them out of Hastelloy, which is a really powerful alloy that stands up to corrosion and abrasion, you name it. It's tough stuff. It's expensive, but it's tough stuff.
up, yeah.
So we made the first few of these on a test basis, and they put them in, and they let them go for over a year. They were changing these out with cast iron every 3 months or so. They let it go
Wow.
for a year, and when they pulled it apart, they said they couldn't even detect any wear on it.
Wow. I see.
So on the one hand, it was great that it lasted so long. On the other hand, the company lost its replacement business.
Yep, that
So
makes perfect sense. That's the tug of war between trying to be profitable versus trying to make good products. So if your product is too good, then you basically walk yourself out of business in some ways. And
yeah,
if your product is bad, and then I mean you probably are gonna get more business. However, you're gonna lose business because of how bad your product is. Therefore, you gotta find that sweet
there's a
medium.
sweet spot there. Yeah.
But yeah, or look for other ways to do business around that product. Look for additional things to help drive your growth. Yeah, that's interesting. I never
Yeah.
got to where I actually practiced anything I learned in school. So for the most part, I'm an IT guy by profession, but my background is really just engineering, math, physics, and um, yeah, fun stuff. So tell me a little bit about so maybe we should start by getting to know you a little bit better. So do you mind like telling us what is your origin story? Tell us about yourself, your life, and why did you make the decisions you made, and how did you end up here today?
Sure. I have always been interested in business. In fact, the reason I'm in the foundry business in the first place is that it ran in my family. My grandfather started a company back in the Great Depression. He was an immigrant from Poland, and he didn't realize that you couldn't do that during the Great Depression. So he did it anyway, and he became successful. So my father and uncle worked for him. They didn't get along with my grandfather. He was a tough guy. I loved him, but he was a tough guy. So they left and started their own company, which is another foundry in a different part of the business.
Is
Then
this
they had
all
their,
happening in Poland or is it here?
no, that's here. Yeah, my grandfather, uh, he may be one of the early illegal immigrants. What he did is his parents set him up with a woman to marry that he didn't want any part of. So
Ah,
he just took off. He got himself on a freighter. And in Baltimore, that's what they came in to port. He
mhm.
jumped ship and disappeared into America. He showed up here in Western Massachusetts, and
Oh, wow.
he worked in foundries, which is where he learned the trade, and then he started his own company. So, my background in the foundry goes way back because even as a child, my mother would bring me and my brothers down just to see my father at lunchtime. Of course, there's molten metal all around, and it's dusty and dirty, and we just kind of figured, well, that's pretty cool. It's a company. It's where people go to work, and there's nothing wrong with that. And they were all nice guys, and so it literally is. It gets in your blood. It's like what you know from a very young age.
Mhm.
With most people, they're probably turned off by the idea of playing with molten metal, but for me, it was just that's work. That's what you do.
Mhm.
So my uncle and father started another company. They had their falling out, and then my father started another company, and my brother and I worked for him. We didn't see eye to eye, so my brother and I started our own company.
That's
And
interesting.
I was the president of that company for 23 years, and then I sold my half of it to my brother. The company's still operating. I've been gone from there for about 20 years now, but that's my business background.
Oh,
After I left the foundry, I invested in real estate for a few years, but then I came to realize how serious misinformation and misunderstanding of diabetes is. I've been diabetic since 1981. In fact, I became diabetic shortly after we started our company. And at that time, I was doing a lot of the manual labor. We were pouring molten metal. Stainless steel, you melt it at about 3,000 degrees,
mhm,
and you pour it 3,000 pounds at a time. And so you have to be able to do that safely.
mhm,
I kept my diabetes to myself because I didn't want people thinking I was somehow unable to do that work safely.
mhm,
So I kept it to myself for 30 years. Um, the reason I decided to open myself up about it is that I was in Chicago during the week when Ron Santo was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I got to give you a little background about diabetes before I tell you the story about him. When diabetics have high blood sugar, everybody knows that the high blood sugar is what causes the damage. But
mhm,
if you take insulin or certain type 2 medications, you can have low blood sugar also. And low blood sugar is a problem for a different reason.
mhm,
Unlike other parts of your body, your brain doesn't store glucose. It takes it directly from the blood as it's needed. So if there isn't very much glucose in the blood, the brain starts to go haywire.
mhm.
Things start happening. You can start sweating, you lose your coordination, your eyesight gets funky to where you're seeing double or triple. Anything that the brain controls, which is really your whole body, starts
Isn't that what
to,
they call hypoglycemia?
that's what it is. Yep. Hyperglycemia means your blood sugar is too
Mhm.
high. Hypo
Hypo.
means it's too
Yeah.
low.
Yeah.
Right. That's the technical term for it. So when you have hypoglycemia, these things can happen. Now that you understand that, let me tell you the story about Ron Santo. He was in a game in Chicago. It was the last of the ninth. The Cubs were down by two. There were two outs and two men on base.
Mhm,
Santo was in the on deck circle. While he's in the on deck circle, he feels the symptoms of low blood sugar coming on. He's starting to sweat a little bit. Then he knows that other symptoms follow after that.
mhm,
So he couldn't go back to the dugout and tell the manager that he wanted a candy bar because he had kept it a secret. He thought the Cubs would fire him if they found out he was diabetic.
mhm.
And he might have been right about that. So he couldn't go back there and get the sugar he needed. So he's praying for the guy to make it out. Instead, the guy walks. So now his base is loaded. Santo said he walked to the plate. He looked up, and there were three pitchers, three scoreboards, 30 some odd people standing out in the field. And when the pitcher threw the ball, it looked like it had a slinky attached to it. So he took a cut at the ball, connected, and put it out of the park for a walk-off grand slam home run.
Wow.
So he made it around the bases and back to the dugout in time to eat his candy bar. And nobody knew that story for 10 years when they had Ron Santo Day, when he
Wow.
was on the verge of retiring. And that's when he came out and told everybody that he had diabetes. So that's a pretty great story,
Yeah, that's
especially for diabetics who understand that the real interesting part of the story isn't the fact that he hit the home run, it's what was going on in his head during that whole time. I mean, he's
Yeah.
up there, taking a chance on passing out in front of 20,000 fans,
Yeah,
but he
losing the
got it.
game and losing maybe his life or getting some type of damage to his brain, like all of that. That's a lot. Yeah, he took some risks there, definitely.
Yeah. So I came home and started telling that story, and nobody understood diabetes. And nobody really knew anything about it. But what was surprising to me personally is that I could explain type 1 because that's what I have. But I
Hmm.
was asked about type 2. And when I looked into it, I realized that most of what I thought about it was untrue. So when I realized that I, as a diabetic, had such misunderstanding of type 2, I figured, well, our society has a real problem here because if I don't understand it, the chances are most other people don't either. And in talking to many other people over the years, I've proved myself right about that. So that's why I've taken this on as my retirement project. What I'm doing is trying to change society. I want to have an informed society that respects diabetics who fight the disease and encourages those who don't to take it seriously. And this is a problem that needs to be solved. Number one, diabetes is hard to manage. People don't understand that. They think you take a pill in the morning and it's a done deal. It's anything but that. It's very complicated. And no matter what medication you take, there's still a lot that you have to do personally. The other thing is that many people ignore the fact that they have it. And these people will die from it. Diabetes that untreated is a fatal disease. And we need to get the word out that you have got to take this seriously. I'll give you one example uh, that hits close to home. There was a guy that I knew for over 30 years. He was an employee. And I didn't run into him, but I spoke to him over the telephone a few years ago. It turned out that he had diabetes and he didn't take care of it. He told me that he couldn't take the pain any longer. And he went to the hospital. They took one leg off on one day and the other one off on the next. And now he's in a wheelchair. 2 years after that, he died. I went to his wake. He had died of diabetes complications. So this is what happens with, untreated diabetes, and we have got to get that message home because I've met a lot of diabetics out there who do not pay attention to it at all. And unfortunately, or fortunately, the symptoms are not severe at the beginning. You can have the condition that'll lead to diabetes for 8 to 10 years before you really experience noticeable symptoms. But you have to recognize that when you first get told that you've got prediabetes, that's the time to start working on it. So that's why
It's
I'm talking to
funny.
people like you, Armel.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that you said that. About 2 years ago, I went to my annual visit with my doctor, and she said it's not that you're pre-diabetic, but you are going to be pre-diabetic if you I don't know what you're doing, but it's almost as if they can see it coming. I mean, she had my blood work and she walked me through it. She said it's not critical, but I would highly recommend you reduce your intake of sugar and carbs and whatnot. And it took me like a year. So between the time she told me that and the time I took the decision to actually start working out and taking care of myself consistently, I probably gained like 20, 25 pounds between when I found out going to be I was heading that direction and when I made the decision. And I ultimately just sat up one day and I said I was sick of this. And between then and now, I've probably lost just about that much weight. Probably I'm right around 30 pounds down now at this point. And I'd like to ask you, what do you think once you find out, right, that you're either pre-diabetic or you're diabetic or you're going to be diabetic if you keep on living this, if you keep your lifestyle the way it is, what is the first thing instinctively, based on your experience, what should everyone do the moment they see that red flag, or the moment they hear about it, or the moment they sense it, or the moment they find out about it? What do you do?
Well, let me start by explaining what diabetes is. Everything
Okay.
I say will make more sense if I do that first.
Okay.
When non-diabetic people eat food, it gets digested into glucose. Glucose is a form of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
It goes into your bloodstream. When it gets into the bloodstream, goes to every part of your body where it's used to provide energy for your body's cells.
Yourself, yeah.
When your pancreas senses that there's glucose in the blood, it releases a hormone called insulin.
Mm-hmm.
Insulin's job is to be a key. It gets in the blood along with the glucose and it opens the cells so that they will accept the glucose. The pancreas releases just the right amount of insulin. So the glucose raises up when it first gets in the bloodstream, but then the insulin allows it to leave the blood and go into the cells. So that process keeps your blood glucose in a normal, healthy
Yeah,
range.
okay.
So there are always ups and downs. There isn't one number for glucose. It's every day, every hour. It fluctuates a little bit, even for people who don't have diabetes. Now, with diabetics, that process doesn't work anymore. In my case, I've got an autoimmune disease that has triggered my body to kill the insulin producing cells in the pancreas. So I don't produce insulin, at least not enough to take care of the glucose. People who have type 1 have no choice but to take insulin, and that's got to be taken by injection because it's broken down in digestion. So, you will take, boluses 3, 4, 5 times a day. So at least it's simple. Doctors know you got type 1, that's what the treatment is. Type 2 is a different disease that also happens to cause high blood glucose levels. That starts with a condition called insulin resistance. And that is exactly what the name says. It makes your cells resistant to insulin. Because of that, your pancreas has to produce more and more insulin to overcome the resistance. Eventually, it wears out. By the time you've got prediabetes, you've probably lost about half of your pancreas's ability to produce insulin.
Wow.
So at that point, you really have to start treating. Your doctor mentioned about, knowing that you were probably going to become diabetic. I don't know why she would say that, except that, especially with general practitioners, that they're not trained in diabetes the way endocrinologists are or certified diabetes instructors. So they don't really have the details that the endocrinologists do. The way this disease starts is that you need a genetic predisposition for both type 1 and type 2. And
Really?
you get those conditions when you hit something in the environment that triggers it. Now, we can't do anything about our genetics, and the triggers are so complicated, we don't understand those either. In fact, they may be different for different people.
Everybody.
So
Wow.
it's nothing you can really prevent. But, we have this idea that being overweight is what causes diabetes. But the fact is that most overweight people don't become diabetic. If you look at National Institutes of Health statistics, they tell you that about 70% of us are overweight, but only about 10% of us have diabetes. And at the same time, many thin people who exercise and watch their food do get diabetes.
True. That is true.
The reason for that is that weight is not what triggers it.
Okay.
Now, once you have the underlying condition, in the case of 95% of people who have diabetes are type 2. So type 2 is really what we're talking about here. When you realize that you've got type 2, that's when you do the things you need to do to manage your blood sugars and keep them low. The weight comes in at that point, but it's not in the way people seem to think. There are two kinds of fat. There's a subcutaneous type that is the soft, squishy stuff that we think of that's right underneath your skin. But
Mm-hmm.
there's another kind called visceral fat that's hard and it's packed internally around your organs. Visceral fat makes insulin resistance worse. So when you
That's
lose,
the fat they're referring to, not the one that we see.
right, the subcutaneous doesn't seem to have much to do with diabetes,
Okay.
but the visceral fat definitely does. So we're asked to lose, 5 to 7% of your body weight. And the reason that makes a difference is that when you lose weight, the visceral fat is what goes first. So you're getting rid of the stuff that's making your insulin resistance worse.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
But
Yeah.
see, that's one of the big things I'm trying to get people to understand. Most people think that you got diabetes because you're overweight or you ate too much sugar or you were lazy. These are all things that, people point their finger and say, well, you brought it on yourself. What do you expect? And none of those is true. Those are all factors in managing the disease, but they do not initiate it.
So the impact, so they could make it worse, but those are not the root causes of the disease. But they
Right.
can accentuate whatever the condition is. They could make a bad situation worse, but that is not the root cause of the situation.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you don't have insulin resistance, you won't be diabetic no matter how much you weigh. If people don't talk about diabetes, so you really don't know who has it and who doesn't. But no doubt, a lot of overweight people who aren't diabetic. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it's a kind of a shame that people are scared into thinking that if they're overweight, they're going to become diabetic, and it's a scary thing for them. What makes it even worse is that when somebody becomes diabetic, they blame themselves because many diabetics don't understand how the thing starts in the first place either. When I was doing my courses in person before COVID, one of the best things that would happen to me is after I was done explaining the facts of diabetes, that diabetics would come up to me and tell me the best thing I told them was that they didn't bring this on themselves because they've been walking around thinking that they got it because they were overweight. Like 70% of people are overweight. And when they understand that they didn't cause it themselves, you can just see the guilt drip off their faces. They've been walking around feeling ashamed and guilty over something they had no business feeling ashamed or guilty about. So that that kind of thinking has to go away because I think that's one of the reasons people don't talk about it. They're ashamed of getting it mistakenly. And when they don't talk about it, they don't help themselves or other people with peer support. If you get back to my employee who didn't pay attention to his diabetes, he,
Mm-hmm.
he did tell me that if I ever got it, to take care of it. Now, I had diabetes for decades when I knew him, but he didn't know that. Now, what if he did know that? Maybe he would have come to me and said, Chet, I've got diabetes. What can you tell me? And I could have talked to him like I'm talking to you now, and maybe it would have made a difference. But when we have millions of diabetics out there who, like me, keep it to themselves, you're depriving everybody else of peer support, never mind yourself. So that's another aspect of this that really needs to change.
So in a nutshell, what would you what and I know it kind of varies from person to person. Like you said, there are genetic causes, and those genetic causes have environmental triggers, and it could be different for every person. Is it fair to therefore say that the root cause of diabetes it is mostly genetic,
Yeah.
or
Well,
or
it's a combination of genes and triggers. A lot of people have the genes for it, but if it don't hit the triggers, they don't become diabetic. So it's both of those things that come into play.
okay? Do we have any understanding or any research around like around possible triggers for this dormant genetic condition that most people have? Do we have an understanding of what could be a trigger, for instance, or what things could be triggers?
Well,
Like pollen, like we have, like right now we have the flu going around, we have allergies, and do we have an understanding around what that could be?
we really don't. And you would think that we would have them nailed
Right.
down by now, but we don't. Uh, Viruses, possibly allergies. I mean, we really don't know what the triggers are, and they may vary from person to person. In my case, I 100% believe that it was a virus that triggered mine. And the reason I say that is that I got it when I was 29 years old. I was healthy. I wasn't overweight. I was, working out. I mean, I was in fine health. But then I got slammed with this virus, and I was on the sofa for 3 days. I never get, I don't get sick at all. Never mind that sick.
Wow.
3 months later is when I was diagnosed. So in my mind, that is what the trigger was in my case.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But you know, other researchers, they say, well, they give you the same answer I just gave you. Well, maybe they haven't proven it. I just know
Yeah,
that in my case, there was a direct, if that wasn't the cause, then that was a heck of a coincidence because nothing else in my life that I'm aware of changed between then and when I
yeah.
got diagnosed.
Same environment. Everything stayed the same except for the fact that you had this weird 3 day period where you just slammed and just it just took over. So it was it the flu? Do you remember? Was it influenza virus?
I
Whatever.
don't, it was just a garden variety type of virus. Back in the day, this is back in 1981, and it was like you got the flu. Maybe they knew what strain it was, maybe they didn't. Uh, all I know is I was really sick.
That makes sense. Okay,
But
wow.
but here's the good news. I mean, it's not good news to be diagnosed with prediabetes, which, by the way, prediabetes is really the same condition as diabetes. They both have the underlying factor of insulin resistance. The
Yeah.
only difference between prediabetes and diabetes is that diabetes is an indication of a much higher level of blood sugar. So, prediabetes, you're down around, I don't know, 105, something like that. For diabetes, it's up over 125. So it's just a measure of how much sugar is in your blood. The good
Okay.
news is that when you get diagnosed with prediabetes, that means you have insulin resistance. As a matter of fact, that is how insulin resistance is diagnosed. You would think there would be a test for it so you could take it years before you even had the prediabetes, but there isn't. The only test they have is expensive and they use it for research purposes. So, prediabetes, that is the way you determine insulin resistance. But once you have it, if you start doing the right things by keeping your weight in control, being aware of how sugar winds up in your blood in the first place, being aware of how important exercise is to controlling blood sugars, you can really prevent yourself from getting to diabetic levels. And even if you get to diabetic levels, we can tolerate high blood sugars to a certain degree. Like in my
Okay.
case, for example, um, let me back up a little bit. The key measurement is called a hemoglobin A1C test.
It
This is
was
something your doctor can do all the time. And if your doctor's afraid of you're becoming diabetic, that's something she ought to be doing every time you see her. It's a simple, pinprick blood test. If you are at 7 or below, that is really good control for a diabetic. But
I
that
think mine
trend,
was 6 the last time we checked. Yeah. I'm at 6. A1C is 6 right now, 6 point something.
well, see, that's probably why she's telling you that you may be headed in that direction because that is a marginally high blood sugar. So,
Hmm.
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay. I see. I see.
But that gives you the advantage of knowing it before it gets further along. Look at it this way. You've lost a certain amount of capacity to produce insulin already. Your goal is to preserve as much of that remaining capacity as you can. And the way you preserve it is by limiting the amount of insulin your body requires. You're trying to keep your pancreas from having to work
That's
overtime to
why
make the
I don't
extra
want to
insulin.
take too much sugar. Okay. Okay.
Right. So
Um,
the two main ways you do that are number one, by not putting as much sugar into your body. And the key to that is not sugar per se, it's carbohydrates in
Fine.
general. Now, many people don't equate carbohydrates with sugar, but it is the same thing because 1 gram of carbohydrate digests into 1 gram of sugar. So if you're eating a gram of bread, you're eating a gram of sugar. It's not quite sugar yet, but it will be by the time your body gets done converting it. So
Wow.
what we need to do is identify where the carbohydrates are coming from that you're putting into your body. And that sounds really complicated, but the way I tell people to look at it is that We really don't have that varied a diet for the most part. Our breakfasts and our lunches are round about the same. Your dinners are going to vary more, but over
Hmm.
the course of a month, most of us repeat the recipes. So when you really look at the whole number of foods we eat, it's really not that great. And
There's not a huge variety, not as much as you think. Yeah.
well, you need a variety, and you can get a variety, and you can eat carbohydrates, but you shouldn't be overloading on them. That's the problem.
Right.
Um, that see once you identify them, you can usually find some low hanging fruit where you can say, okay, that's where my carbohydrates are really coming from. In another class that I gave, I had a woman who told me that her blood sugars were always over 200 and she couldn't get them down no matter what she did. Well, in talking to her, it turned out that her husband worked the second shift. And when he came home, she made him supper and he liked pasta. So she was making him pasta every night and she was having dinner with him. So she was eating pasta every night before she went to bed. Pasta is very high in carbohydrate.
That's
So I
still hard.
suggested for the next week, just stop eating that pasta. Eat something different. Eat some protein, and that's what she did. And she came back the following day. I'm sorry, the following week, and her blood glucose level had dropped to the low 100s, which was perfect. Considering that our normal blood sugar is from 70 to 130, it really is perfect. She's right there in the normal range.
Right.
So in her case, that was the low hanging fruit. That was the one thing where you could identify it and say, okay, this is something I got to work on. If
Hmm.
you're a person who drinks a lot of sugared soda, and a lot of people do that, that is the low hanging fruit. If you switch from sugared soda to a zero carb beverage, then you're doing yourself a world of good. So those are the kinds of major league things we can address right away.
Okay. And so it really doesn't matter the type of carbohydrate. It doesn't matter if it's processed or natural. Like say something like rice. Rice is carbs. In my culture, we have this thing called fufu. It's made basically it's starch, right? So you have starch, which is carbs. So it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter if it's manufactured, processed, natural. Carb is carb, and you wanna reduce that the best you can.
Yeah. It doesn't matter where the sugar comes from. Uh, some people think that if you eat fruits, that the sugars in that don't count, but they do. The sugar is sugar is sugar, no matter where it comes from. There are, some foods are higher in carbohydrates than others. Uh, most vegetables are pretty good. If you eat peas or carrots, they're not too bad as far as carbs go. But if you eat peas, peas are very high in carbohydrate. So you really have to identify
Really? Peas are? Well, I don't eat peas, but I wouldn't, off the top of my head, I wouldn't think peas have that much carb in it. They
yeah, they
do?
do,
Oh, wow. Okay.
which is too bad because my wife makes split pea and ham soup.
Oh,
I
wow.
love it. I love it. And I eat it when she makes it, but I know my blood sugar is going up, you know. But but it's not that hard to figure out which ones are high carb. Most of us have Alexa or Siri. All you have to do, Armel, is ask Siri, Siri, how many carbs in an ear of corn? And Siri will tell you. If you go to a restaurant, you can go online. And most restaurants now they have the menu broken down, and they'll tell you what the carb content is.
The
So,
calorific content is, that's right.
is that
Wow.
is Siri responding to your? That's the second time that's happened to me. I should know better.
Oh, God.
But at least there's the proof, Armel. What I'm telling you works. That it's not hard to find out.
Yeah, that's right. So in your opinion, is it possible at all? Because I think based on what you said, it sounds as though it's possible to slow down the progress of diabetes, but is it also possible to reverse it entirely?
Well, here's another source of confusion. We hear the words reverse or cure. So some people who say you can cure diabetes. When we think about cures, most people think that you've dealt with whatever the condition is it's gone and it's not coming back.
Right.
But
That's right.
that is not what they mean in the world of diabetes. What they mean is that you have dropped your blood sugar below a certain threshold for a certain amount of time. And if you've done that, then they say, well, you're cured. Well, the reason your blood glucose is down below that threshold is because you watched what you ate, you exercised, and you took your medication. And if you stop doing those things, you're going to be uncured in a heartbeat.
Wow.
So, according to the definition that some people use, yeah, you can be cured, but it's not a permanent cure. You're only cured because you're treating it effectively.
So given that we kind of understand that it's basically a genetic condition that is triggered by something in your environment. It could be a virus, like in your case, or something else. Wouldn't it make sense that if it's like a door, right? So the virus was the key that opened that door, and now you have diabetes. Wouldn't it make sense that you could have something similar, either a virus or something else, to shut down that gene that got activated? Do we have any type of studies around that? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but
Well,
or
yeah,
yeah,
no, that's a dream. That's a dream, Armel. That it would be great if we could do that, and maybe someday we will. Maybe that's something AI will have a hand in.
right. That's that's
But
right.
right now we don't have it. There's been a recent development where if we identify a young person, a child who is likely to develop type 1, they can delay the onset of type 1 by 2 or 3 years. That doesn't prevent it forever, but it does prevent the onset. So maybe there's a germ of an idea there for type 1 anyway. With type 2, I don't know that there's anything like that out there. I can tell you this about type 2. University of Massachusetts recently completed a study, a worldwide study of genetics and type 2 diabetes, and they found over 200 genes that are connected to it.
Hmm.
So the genetic predisposition is out there big time. And
Wow.
unfortunately, a lot of people are susceptible to it, and we really don't know how to stop it.
Yeah, it sounds like something that anybody could have, and nobody really, and you can't really stop it because you don't know what the trigger is, and it could be anything. You could, travel to some state or go to a party and eat something, inhale something, or touch something, or it's like in the ether. You really can't. You have no way of
Y-
finding this. Once you really understand how it's triggered and how it works, you can only manage it whenever it comes.
Yeah, well, you don't, and it's to my way of thinking, it's not worth even thinking about. There's nothing you can do about it. And suppose you did know, like suppose I knew that that virus was going to trigger type 1. What would I have done to not get it? I have no idea who carries the virus, just like
Well,
COVID.
one thing you could do is figure out if either that virus could serve to reverse, either that virus could reverse whatever it did, or there's a way to engineer that virus to do the opposite of what it did in the first place. I'm just thinking of the top. That could be one way to approach it. But it's both sad and interesting at the same time that and to be completely honest, you did. I've learned a lot today already at this point. I thought I understood diabetes, but I realized that I really didn't.
Mhm.
And you did say that's the case for most people, so that turned out to be true. And just kind of thinking about it, and diabetes. So what are the stats? Because my original understanding, and it's true that people associate being overweight with diabetes, and we kind of flushed that out. So how is it that I guess it comes down to how you manage it, right? So the reason you are able to manage diabetes by losing weight is because losing weight actually reduces. So working when you start working out, before you lose the subcutaneous fat, you're losing the what did you call the other one that's around
The
our
Well, there's visceral and
visceral,
subcutaneous.
yeah, visceral fat. So losing the visceral fat reduces your insulin resistance by default, which
Right.
basically allows you to process a bit more sugar than you would. And then reducing the amount of sugar you take in reduces the need for insulin. Therefore, all those things kind of help you get better overall and get your blood sugar down to the right levels.
Yeah, and there's another major factor that we should talk about too, and that's exercise.
Right?
Exercise is very important, and it's often given short shrift. It shouldn't be. When you have muscle mass, the muscle either burns the sugar or it stores it for future use. Either way, it takes the glucose out of your blood and it's not in your bloodstream anymore, so it's not doing you that damage.
Oh yeah.
So the more muscle you have and the more active you are, the better this works. Many people are averse to the idea of exercise, but the exercise that we're talking about for diabetes is not a heavy workout where you're sweating and lifting weights and all that. What we're talking about is everyday activity,
Like
like
walking.
walking, climbing the stairs, doing housework, going to the store, just everyday things like that that keep your body moving is really even more powerful than a heavy workout is. So, really, anything aside from sitting on the sofa all day is really helping your body to reduce that blood sugar.
Mm. So just
And
moving around and just being active overall, not specifically. So you don't have to go do a 30-minute cardio or something. You could just walk around in your neighborhood, just get out of the house and walk around or ride your bike or do something. And
exactly right. Here I've written a couple of books, and the woman who did the design work on the books became diabetic. She told me that she did the design work on the books, but she never actually read them. But once she got diagnosed with diabetes, she decided to read the book. She especially decided to read it after she was prescribed a medication by her doctor, and she went to the pharmacy and found out it was going to cost her $500. So she told the pharmacist to put it back on the shelf, and then she decided to read my book.
oh boy.
So she did just what I told her, which is what I've explained about carbohydrates. Limit your carbohydrates and get physically active. So that's what she did. She cut her carbohydrate intake. She went for a walk for 20 minutes a day. You don't have to set aside a time and do 20 minutes a day, by the way. You can do it 5 or 10 minutes at a time. So, you don't have to dedicate a big chunk of time to it. But she did this for a few months and then went back to her doctor. And she told me her doctor gave her a one-man standing ovation and asked her how she did it. And so she told him. She said, well,
Wow.
I love this. She said, well, I read Galaska's book. And of course, this guy doesn't know who I am. But she told him, it was really diet and exercise. And she lost some weight and her blood glucose level came right down. He was impressed. So that's basic stuff that people need to know.
Yeah,
And they
something
don't.
everybody could do. It doesn't cost you any money. All you really need to do is just get up and be alive. Don't sit down. I mean, nowadays, with the type of work we do, we sit in front of a computer screen all day. We don't like to move much. And I think that's part of the reason because when I started working, with COVID and everything, the lockdown, started working from home, and I was sitting a lot. I think that's what kind of spiked in my case, at least in my case, my weight. And then once I really got to the point where I got fed up with it, I started working out. I've been doing this for like almost 2 years at this point, like consistently working out. You just feel much better, and at first it's kind of hard to do, and depending on how heavy you are, obviously, somebody that's much more heavier than somebody that has a higher BMI than yourself will probably struggle a little bit more with exercise. So the heavier you are, the harder it is. So it used to be hard at first, but right now it's like second nature. You got to take that first step and just even if you're not gonna do much, just get out the house, go out in the backyard, or just get out the house and walk out in front of if you're in an apartment, walk around your apartment complex, walk around your house, walk around your neighborhood. Just take those baby steps. Because another thing that I've figured out is when people usually people have the New Year resolution, right, where they say, okay, I'm gonna lose weight this year, I'm gonna get a gym membership, and then they start going. But you see the gym packed around the end of December, early January. By the time you get to February, March,
It's,
those
it's
places
empty.
go. Yeah. So it's not about like doing a giant leap. Just take baby steps, just get out and walk and build that habit. But it's not easy because I tried and failed a few times before I actually got really intentional. And at this point, it's almost I don't have to think about it. I just get up and go, or get up and go work out, get up and go to the gym, and it's changed my life. I'm much healthier compared to how I used to be, and I feel a lot. You have higher energy, you feel better. My recent blood work that came back was excellent. Well, she didn't call me, but her nurse called me and told me it's great. The A1C went down some,
Yep.
and yeah, I didn't have to take any medication. Just
Well, see, there's the proof right there, Armel. You said it got easier. Well, it got easier because you built some muscle.
yes,
And
that part. Yeah,
so you built the muscle and then you kept it active. And what happened is that glucose went from your bloodstream into your muscle, and it got burned when you were walking, and it got saved when you were sedentary. Either way, it came out of your bloodstream, and that's why your A1C was lower.
this is so interesting because I really think I have a much better understanding now because I knew you know that you need to exercise, you need to not take sugar. But I truly didn't understand how the physiological mechanisms that govern the reasons why it works. And your explanation makes a whole lot of sense to me. And I think that this message needs to go out to everybody. Just like you said, it could be anybody. You could be the leanest, healthiest person, and you're shocked and surprised. Oh wait, what? I have diabetes. I'm pre-diabetic. How is that possible? I work out. I eat healthy. I'm eating rice, you're eating this, but you really, I mean, it comes down to how the body works, and it doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside, because there's certain rules, how your bloodstream, your cells, your muscles work, and if you don't understand that and you violate the rule, your blood sugar is gonna go up. You're gonna start developing
Yeah.
um, insulin resistance. And so there's something that you said earlier in our conversation that kind of stuck in my head that I keep trying to go back to. Is there a reason why? Because you kind of told me the story, kind of your genealogy, right? Your how your grandpa started this business, and then his thing, your dad and your uncle worked for him, and then they kind of fell out, and then they started their own, and then your dad and your uncle kind of fell out, and then he started his own, and you were working for your dad. You were not seeing eye to eye, and then you started your own. Is it for the same reason that you guys keep kind of like diverging? What explains the I mean, it kind of looks like a pattern to me, don't you?
Well, it's a pattern for sure. Um,
What explains that?
if there, what it might get down to. I never really thought about this, but what it might just get down to is an independent streak that we all have. We all have our own ideas, and we really don't want to be told what to do. And
Mm,
maybe that's what it is. And when you're the member of a family, you will say things to members of your family that you probably wouldn't say to somebody who wasn't a member of your family. And of course there's all that
both good and
baggage.
bad, by the way, not just bad. Yeah.
So maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
And so, how has this shaped your life? So, first of all, for the audience, um, you you found out you were diabetic, pre-diabetic, roughly what 30 years ago or so,
Uh,
and
Actually, it's 43 years ago.
43 years ago. Wow. Okay. So, are you still pre-diabetic or diabetic now? And yes or no? And if you are, how are you dealing with it? Because again, everybody has their own, specific preconditions or other underlying issues and so on and so forth. How do you actually manage your condition if you still are diabetic?
Well, well, first off, the pre-diabetic condition only applies to type 2.
Okay.
That's a function of the insulin resistance. So once you have the insulin resistance, your blood sugars start to rise. When they get to a certain level, it's called prediabetes. When it gets even higher, then it's called diabetes.
That is your A1C, right?
Uh, Well, yeah, the A1C, I believe it's like 6.4 is the cutoff for diabetes. 5.7 to 6.4 is pre-diabetes, and anything below 5.7 is a normal blood sugar.
Okay.
So when you were saying before that yours was in the sixes, that's
Mhm.
probably why your doctor said,
About two
well,
years ago, yeah, it was. It was.
yes, so you're trending toward the higher end, right, toward that 6.4 that is pre-diabetes.
Mhm.
So I don't have that. I've got type 1, which means that my pancreas doesn't produce any insulin. And my only treatment is to take insulin. So since the day I was diagnosed all those years ago, I've taken shots of insulin several times a day, every single day. I've never had a day where I didn't take an injection. And
Wow. And
that
how
that
often do you need to do that? Like,
well, when I,
every day, and what kind of cost is associated to that? Are they different price points for these injections, or is it the same thing? Or these are different brands? And
no, that the insulin, well, they just brought the insulin prices down. It was a real problem for many people up until fairly recently, where it was costing, hundreds of dollars for a vial of insulin.
oh
Now I
yeah,
think,
that's one of the things that the Biden administration was trying to fix. Yeah, okay, that's right, that's right. I
yeah,
think
so
I heard about it. Yeah.
so now it's down to $35. So even that's a lot of money, but at least it's available. And for most people, it's affordable. Um, indeed, depending on your condition, and here again, it's a highly individualized disease. What I do will not necessarily work for anybody else. It's based on, my metabolism, the foods that I eat, the amount of exercise that I get. It's really something that the individual has to monitor on his own. I'm the one who decides how much insulin I need, and I take it.
So how
I've
do you
had,
come to that number? How do you decide how much you need?
well, I know that if I'm eating 100 carbs for dinner, say, I know that I'm going to need 25 units of insulin to take care of that. 1 unit of
25
insulin,
units?
yeah,
That's 25 shots.
no, that's 25. It's a
Milliliters?
measurement. It's a volume measurement. It's
Oh,
it's how
mill.
much insulin. It's one
Okay.
injection, but it can be 2 units. It can be 40 units. It all depends on how much you've figured out that you need. I mean, many people take insulin in very small doses, like type 2s, for example. They'll use insulin, but nowhere near as much as I need because their pancreas is still producing insulin, whereas mine doesn't.
Right.
So,
And
so that
insulin is the thing that you keep in the ice box, right? You don't keep it on the shelf. It has to be kept cold if I remember correctly.
well, actually, it does. Um, they refrigerate it. The pharmacies will do that, and the medical offices will do that. I do
Uh-huh.
that at home. My supply of insulin is always in the refrigerator.
Right.
But when I pull out a vial, I'll just leave it here in my office because that's where all my supplies are,
Uh-huh.
and it'll get warm. And the doctors will tell you that. Even back in 1980, they told me the instructions are to keep a refrigerator, but don't worry about it if it isn't. You can use it anyway. So that has never changed.
And what type of injection? I think I have a buddy in mind. I was in Dallas one time, and he took something out of the ice box. He told me he wasn't feeling well. I think it happened like he's around my age. By the way, I'm 31, and I saw him taking. He was taking it multiple times a day, and he also had like I guess it's a glucose monitor, the thing to put on
Yeah.
your skin.
Yep.
So so I'm guessing he's got to be type 1, and so he was taking it. So it's just something that you inject in your muscle, right?
No.
Or, so what
No.
do you?
Happily, it's not in the muscle because that would hurt. It goes into the subcutaneous fat.
Oh,
So if you have some fat, in your abdomen, that's generally where people inject it.
that's right. Yeah, he took his belly and then he kind of did this. Okay, okay, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so you put it on in your subcutaneous fat, and then I guess it gets absorbed pretty quickly in the system.
Yeah, it does. It'll take, half hour to an hour to really get into your bloodstream, but it's fairly fast. And
You
by the
also
way,
carry a glucose monitor, or you don't use it?
I do. Yeah, matter of fact, I have a pump also.
Oh,
That the technology has improved so much over the last 40 years. I mean, it's like science fiction today. When I first got diagnosed, the only way I had an idea of what your blood sugar was to use this stuff called test tape. It's a yellow paper that came in a dispenser that looked like a tape measure. Excuse me. And what you would do is take off a little strip of this and dip it in a sample of your urine. If it stayed yellow, it meant your sugar was fine. But if it turned various shades of green, it meant that your sugar was too high. And if it turned black, you knew it was really high. But that was the best we could do. And that was based on urine that was produced by your body an hour earlier. So this was old news. It wasn't what your blood sugar is today.
right.
I have a CGM like your friend does. And now all I've got to do is pull this my pump out of my pocket because that's where the information gets radioed to. I can pull it out of my pocket and it'll tell me right this second what my glucose is right now. So if it's going low, I can eat something. If it's too high, well, then I can either take some more insulin or I can go for a walk. So it gives you the information you need to really finally control your blood glucose levels
In real time.
in real time. I mean, this is, like I said, it's science fiction. Compared in 1981, this stuff was just a dream. Just a
Yeah.
dream.
Didn't they, when I was growing up, people that had diabetes, they used to have to stop themselves. At the time, I didn't even understand why or how. Is that still something that they do today? Was that to figure out what your glucose level was?
Yeah, exactly. That was an intermediary measure.
Okay.
Once in the mid 80s, they came out with individual glucose monitors. So they were small and they were cheap. So you could buy these things for like 19 bucks and you would take a test strip and put it in the monitor, take a little droplet of blood out of your finger and apply that to the test strip. And that would tell you what your blood glucose is right at that instant. So, but you had to do that test every time you wanted to find out what your blood glucose level
Actually
was.
picking yourself.
Yeah, so you'd be, you would prick yourself a number of times during the day. What we have today is what they call a continual glucose monitor, and it does just what the name says. It continually monitors your glucose level. What you do is uh, apply a monitor to your abdomen. It's pretty painless to put in there. It stays there for 10 days and it just continually reads your blood glucose. And then after 10 days, you change it out. So it's just
What
there.
do you have to change out the glucose monitor as well?
Yeah, about every 10 days, you have to change it.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. I thought once you had it on, that's forever.
No, no.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But
So every
but
couple of weeks.
but Arbel, look at it this way. You went from pricking your finger 5 times a
Well,
day
yeah, that's
to changing
obvious.
out this thing once every 10 days. I mean, that's a big deal.
But that's some progress. But I guess we still have some progress to make. We could make one that's kind of permanent. Think about something like a pacemaker. You don't have to take it off out as often, right? So something that has a longer term type functionality. So,
Well, yeah, you're right. Yeah, but it's not like that.
but that's already that's good progress. Because nowadays you're right. I don't think people are still taking themselves. I think that's kind of what the glucose monitor was for. I think he uses on his monitor. Is it on his arm or on his stomach? I
Yeah,
don't know.
you could wear it on your arm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on your arm as well. Yeah, I think he has it on his arm. And he has an app where he basically goes in the app and it basically tells him everything he needs to know. And he knows exactly how much to put in his body based on what the app is telling him in real time. Like you eat, like within minutes, you can literally see your blood sugar rising right after you eat. It's
Yep.
insane.
Yep.
And that's some cool high tech stuff. So I have a couple of questions that I usually like to ask my guests. It could be in line or out of line with our topics, but one of the questions actually comes from my wife. Um, she wants me to ask this to all my guests, and then I have a few of myself. Then I have one that's kind of like a polling question. So the one from my wife would be, what would you tell your younger self, the younger you, if you could go back at 28, 29 maybe, or let's say go before you found out you had diabetes, or after, or at the time, doesn't really matter. If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice, what would you tell yourself?
I don't know. Um, be patient, maybe be more patient.
Okay. And then the next one would be, in your opinion, what makes us human?
What makes us human?
Yeah,
That is a really deep question.
I get this every time. And especially now with AI, right? It's insane. You really got to think about this one. But just take your time.
Uh, uh,
Um,
well, off the top of my head, I think what makes us human is having consciousness. We have conscious minds. They're all independent. They're all things that are a product of our environment, but they're also a product of our individual prejudices and beliefs and education and all these things that fit into that consciousness. Our emotions are part of it. It's a really complicated thing. I I think it. The way I look at it, I equate consciousness with being the soul, and maybe that's what it is. We're human because we have souls.
have souls. Okay. So soul. Wow, that's a very crispy answer. I like that one. Yeah. So what makes us human is the fact that we have consciousness and we have a soul. Do you think those two are the same thing, or those are kind of like aspects of each other? A soul is conscious, or consciousness is a soul? I'm not sure.
You know, I I think the soul is your being. It's the totality of
Of
what you are.
who
Everything excluding your physical body. It's
about
it's
you is your soul.
that's the soul. And I think people talk about consciousness, but nobody uses the word soul. But if you have faith, which I do, soul is a term that we use. And
Right.
I see the soul as being the same thing as the consciousness.
Consciousness. Gotcha. So soul and consciousness. Okay. I like that. I like that. That's a very beautiful way to put it. Your soul and your consciousness are basically the same thing.
Yep.
Okay. And then what what is your philosophy of life, and why do you believe it?
Armel, I don't know that I have a philosophy of life. I've never thought about it in those terms. But if there's a touchstone that I try to live by, it's the golden rule.
Okay. And what
You
is the
know,
goal?
golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Oh wow.
And I
Beautiful.
think if you try to fit everything you do into that, you're living a good life. So
Okay.
it's simple, but it's pretty profound too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Do to others. It's a very simple rule, but if you really objectively apply it to everybody, which is kind of hard to do in the real world, but if you could do that, then you're basically describing a perfect world for the most part. If everybody were to say, okay, I'm not gonna do this because I don't want XYZ to do this to me, if you really thought about everything you did that way, then you definitely, that would be an upgrade for all the totality of humanity.
Well, look at it this way. What if Vladimir Putin lived by that? Would he be sending all those people into war?
Probably not. Um,
Well,
probably not.
I don't see him carrying a rifle, so he's not planning on doing that himself. You know.
That is true. Okay, I have a poll for you. So, of these three things I'm gonna list, um, or let me add one to this. Let's say four, right? Let's say, okay. So there's four things, right? Of these four things, I want to get your take on what do you think is going to be the most important, or what is going to have the most significant impact on on the world within the next 10 to 50 years, say. So the first thing would be medicine. The second thing would be energy, basically creating enough energy to where it becomes very cheap and, improves the lives of people. The third thing would be robo taxes. And the fourth thing would be humanoid robots. The reason I didn't call out AI is because in my opinion, it's as though it's going to impact everything to different degrees, jobs, production, machinery. And you can apply AI to almost anything nowadays. But in a nutshell, if you were to rank these four things as, okay, this is going to be the most impactful thing on our society in the next 25, 50, 100 years. This is going to be next. This is going to be next. What would be your ranking for those four items?
Uh, well, in terms of living life, probably taxes would be the least important. I think humanoid robots would be the next least,
Okay.
and medicine and energy, they're right up there. They're both really important to allowing us to live
The
decent
real world.
lives. But you know what? Of the two, I think energy might be the most important one. And not because of global warming or climate change or any of that stuff. It's because we really are reliant on electric power to do almost anything productive. And especially with AI using the kind of energy it does, we're going to need massive amounts of electricity
Oh yeah.
to enable that. And a lot of good will come from AI, but it needs that power. So we need to figure out an efficient, and efficient's the big word, way to produce that power.
Okay. And then what one tradition we do have on this show is we the every guest gets to leave a question for the next guest. The question that one of the questions I asked you was actually from my previous guest. Is what makes us human? That was from the person I had on the show before you. So, what question do you want me to ask the next person? You obviously don't know who that is or what they do, but what questions would you have me ask my next guest? And I'm gonna write it down.
Hmm. Why can't we all get along?
Oh wow, that's a good one. Why can't we just get along? Okay.
I wonder, I'd like to put a plug in for my website also, Armel. That's
Oh
a
yeah,
big part of what I'm doing here.
yeah,
My
yeah. Just break down how people can get in contact with you, your social media handles or websites. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, the website is challengediabetes.us. It's not
Yeah.
.com, it's .us because I think this program I'm doing is for all of us. So challengediabetes.us.
Okay.
And the reason I'd like people to go to it, and I would suggest that you go to it especially because you're curious about diabetes and you are trending that way.
Mhm.
I've got I've written two books, but the real things I'd like people to look at are a couple of videos that I put up there. One of them is called The Confusing World of Diabetes, where I talk about a lot of the confusing things that are out there, like whether it's reversal or curable, and various other things. The other one is the nuts and bolts of managing diabetes, where I explain about how to manage diet, why exercise is important, how to do that, and also medications. So this isn't medical advice, but it's the basic stuff that every diabetic needs to know. They're both under a half hour long.
Okay.
My dream is that people will watch them in groups, whether it's your family or a civic group or a book club or a church group or whatever it might be. If you can watch them in groups, it's even more effective, partly because there are that many more
Talk
people who are
about it.
getting the facts. But the other thing is that if you have a meeting that lasts an hour, you can watch this for a half hour and then talk about it afterwards. And what you'll find in those discussions is that a lot of people have experience with diabetes, whether it's personally or with somebody they know, and you'll learn a lot just by interacting with each other afterwards. So I wish I could give them away, but I have expenses, so I got to collect something for them. So, but they're inexpensive. But I really hope people would do that, because as we get more and more people to understand the basic stuff that we talked about, the better the environment's going to be for diabetics, and the more diabetics will get help and help themselves.
Manage manage their conditions better. I would definitely agree with that because just based on the information you told me, like low hanging fruit, most people could quite literally, almost anybody could at least start reversing their condition just with the information you shared with me today. That is actually true. I can
Yep.
testify because I basically have done that for the most part, losing almost 30 pounds, cutting out sugar. Even though I really didn't understand why it worked, I just knew that was what I needed to do. Now with this new level of understanding, it's almost as if it encourages you to go even harder and to be more conscientious and to be more aware of this, and it helps you manage your dietary and lifestyle better. Better, definitely.
It does. Once you really know what you're looking for,
Yeah.
it empowers you, because now you're not just guessing at what you should do. And what you're realizing too is that there are some foods out there that don't raise your blood sugar at all.
I know.
So you can eat as much of those as you want and not worry about the blood sugar.
Okay, proteins. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. That's
So have a look at it. I really think it'll be of use to you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm going to include the links to your website in the description of this video. So anybody that is curious, please go ahead and in the descriptions below, you're going to find a link to Chet's website, and hopefully this information is valuable to you as much as it was to me. I really want to say thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. This random guy reaching out to me and just wanting to talk. I feel blessed by this conversation because I've gained a lot, and I hope that you know um, the universe, God rewards you. Be blessed, and I wish you the best. And if you're open to it, I would like to get you back on because there's actually some items that I wanted to get to that I wasn't able to get to. But we could do a part two if you're open to it. We
Yeah.
could.
Yeah. I've
Thank
enjoyed talking to you. So yeah, we
you.
could do this again.
All right. Thank
On,
you.
on the condition, that you
Yeah.
look at those videos.
Okay. Okay.
When
I
you
will.
look
I
at those
promise.
videos, let me know.
Okay. I will. I will. I'm gonna make sure to look at them myself and then make sure to include them in my description of this video. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Armel.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye bye.
You do. Yep. Bye.